Hi, my name's Matt Groves. I recently attended a national conference on training, and while I was sitting there enjoying some presentations, I thought I'd put some thoughts together I had about training and share them with you. These are the topics I wanted to talk about. We're going to begin with starting with the end in mind, which is an idea I got from Stephen Covey's work on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I also want to talk about how. How do you decide what training to do? How are you going to deliver this? That sort of thing. I also want to talk about continuous improvement. We should always be striving to be better tomorrow than we are today. And then how do you account for the natural evolution of training and those chaos moments? Start with the end in mind. This for me is about I liken it to target practice. If you set a target off in the distance and the goal is to hit the bullseye, then you need to practice shooting at the target. And if you want to be successful at that, you start with, right there at the end, what perfection looks like. What exactly do you want this to be at the very end when you're done? What is the ideal outcome of this situation? And then take incremental steps backwards until you get to the beginning where you are now of, your students don't know anything. And so thinking that way helps you decide, okay, if that's what I want, then how am I going to get there? And so like with target practice, you wouldn't set the target really far away at the beginning of training. You would put it really close so that they could practice getting good at hitting the target and then gradually move the target farther away. And so that's how I've always approached things. When I taught computer security, we knew that the end goal was to pass a standardized test. And so we practiced taking standardized tests every day. And they were short. And then we built up to kind of a bigger final exam sort of standardized test. We also knew that it was computer based. And so the quizzes that we took every day were on the computer so that people were really comfortable and familiar with the end goal. If you're training people on taking phone calls, providing support, then you need to practice operating the phone. You need to practice operating the phone and your documentation software at the same time. You need to practice operating the phone, working the software, and solving the issues all at the same time. You can break those up into sections, but you do want to practice the whole thing together. Um, and so that's just sort of how I look at training is I start with the end in mind. So when we do this, we ask ourselves, why are we here? What are we doing? Why are we doing this training? What is the point of this? And if you don't do that, then you're just wandering around in the woods. You're lost and you don't know what to do and why you're doing it and where you're going. So when you look at training, there's a couple of different kinds of training. One of the most common is sort of compliance training. It's required. HR makes you take this training every year, every 6 months, or is required by law. Or is this training selfish? I'll talk about that here more in a minute. Or do you genuinely care about your students being awesome? So let's look at compliance training first. If the reason why you're doing this training is to check a box, then let's make this training as painless as possible. You can be tongue in cheek if you want to, but if this is the 11th time we've had to watch Mark and Stacy's inappropriate will they or won't they sexually harass each other training, I've got better things to do. If this is just another click next as fast as I can to get through this sort of training, then let's make it painless for people. That's one way to do it. That's path one. And these are in no particular order, which is why I named them that way. The other option, notice that this one's option A, which is also first, just like one. Option A is to go, okay, we have to do this, but let's take this opportunity to make it a really, really good training. Actually teach people how and why in an engaging and memorable way. So if this really is important that we teach our staff about sexual harassment, then let's have it be good training. And let's not make it this thing that's just painful to get through every year. The other really common training I see is I'm training you to make my life better. This isn't about you. This is about my goals and agendas. And so I'm not training to make you a better person or more marketable or to help you achieve your life goals. Um, I'm training you to do tasks A, B, and C because I need those tasks done. We have a job opening here for, uh, worker B number 7. And so I've hired you to be worker bee number 7. You don't know how to be a worker bee. I tell you how to be a worker bee. And now I've, you know, satisfied my need to have another worker bee. The other thing we do a lot is we train our stakeholders, and we do that so they stop bugging us. A more educated clientele doesn't call as often. They don't call, they don't email, they don't reach out to us because they know the answers themselves. They're self-sufficient. And then that way I can focus on other things. I'm not saying this selfishness is bad or whatnot, but the desire, the impetus is based on my needs and not yours. The other way to think about this, to do training, is to think about, I want to train you to make you better. And so the best teachers are really great at 3 things. They know their content, they're good at explaining it, and they care. And so, again, ask yourself this question, why are we doing this training? And whenever I do training, even if it's the compliance stuff, I always look at it this way of, how can I make you a better person? I want you to be able to achieve whatever your dreams are. Ideally, I want you to stay with this agency or company or whatnot. But if you want to go be a ballerina, let's make it happen. Let's make the magic happen. How can I help you get to where you need to go? Okay, so now that you've decided why we're doing the training, the next thing to look at is, how are we going to accomplish this? How are we going to execute training? So we have classic training, lecture, stand in front of a room full of people kind of stuff. And that's where we do workshops and go to benefit fairs and that kind of thing. Or we can take those classical offerings and we could modernize them. Which is what we did during the pandemic, where we took our existing training and instead of going in front of a room full of people, we just sat in front of a camera. And so we went to webinars or recordings, but it's still the same thing. It's a modernized classic. Or we can take just a completely novel approach and do modern training. And this is where you see things like podcasts or, TikTok shorts or reels, YouTube videos, even AI generated training. So there's different ways we can deliver this, and you just have to ask yourself, how are we going to do it? When you're answering that question, there are some things to consider. Once you release something into the wild, it's no longer in your control. So it's there out there on the interwebs, and people can do whatever they want with it. And so you have to ask yourself this question of, does that matter? Do I care that it's out there? Think about that. And now think about this. Does your answer change if you understand that there's nothing you can do to stop it from going public? People can record things on their phones. They can record the Zoom meetings or Teams meetings or whatever webinar you're putting out there. Next thing to consider is this training in a vacuum? When you're conducting live in-person training, it's not just the training that's happening. You're connecting with people. You're building relationships and trust. And that is significantly harder to do with out-of-band training. So yes, I can deliver the same content in a live webinar or in a live workshop that I do in a webinar. I deliver the same material, but you're not getting that same human connection when you do it on a webinar. And you need to think about that. That's a cost that you're going to pay when you do things with technology instead of in person. Next thing to consider is maintenance. All training needs to be maintained, and so how can we minimize those efforts? Can this information be updated real time, or is it hard-coded? And then finally, another thing to consider is, does everything need to match? Do we absolutely need to stay on brand, or can we just release some training on a white background with black text? Taking a moment to think about continuous improvement with my security computer security hat on, it's much easier to add security measures at the beginning than it is to add it after the fact. So think about where your training materials will be housed from the get-go. Another issue that's best handled from inception is equity. For example, as a cis white male, I made a conscious effort to include women and people of color in this presentation. Representation matters, and the last thing people need to see more of is straight white guys. If the collateral in this presentation is interesting to you, I would recommend looking at Black Illustrations. They put out some really great products, and that's why I chose to include these here. As you consider how to conduct trainings, think about your carbon footprint. Are trainers traveling? Are they renting cars? Are they flying? And when they do those things, don't ask if there's anything you can do. Assume you're going to do something and ask how many different things can be done. Make the decision to not only conserve energy, but regenerate it. How can we leave this world a little better place with our training than just costing us? All trainings face inevitable staleness and deprecation. Laws change, processes change, links on web pages change, and think about that in the design phase. Anticipate what parts of your training are likely to change and make it easy for your future self to update. And even if there are no critical updates, consider changing your training periodically because brains crave novelty. People get bored and complacent. And then last, I want to talk about effectiveness. Did your training work? Assume that the training you've put together is not going to work. The only way to be sure is to measure it. And so ask questions and don't be coy or shy about it. Thank you for attending this training. I'd really appreciate some honest feedback. What was confusing? So what I've done there is assume that there were confusing things. What did you want more of? Assume you didn't get enough of the good stuff. What did you want less of? Assume I put too much of certain things. What could you cut out of future trainings? And as you get this feedback, immediately reflect on that input and make the changes. We spend a lot of time concerning ourselves with making a training perfect and getting approval from management. What we need to do is treat it as a perpetual rough draft. Sure, eventually we'll settle on something and that can be the final official approved training, but even that needs updating and you need the flexibility to adapt. Some change is anticipated and some is not. So look at the COVID pandemic. Who came out of that really great? Why? How? What did they do to really come out on top? And I think it was the people who were able to pivot most and just kind of roll with the chaos. Some change is that anticipated stuff. We have annual reviews, we have quarterly reviews, we have calendars, fiscal and legislative. And so we have these things that are planned in that we need to update. You also need to think about staleness. We want to keep things fresh. People get bored. And so some of your references might be timely and you need to update those. Also think about your trainer. Somebody has to get up in front of a room full of people and say this 100 million times, and it gets old. And so trainer burnout is a thing, and you want to keep it fresh for your trainers. And then on the other side, students. These people are exhausted hearing you say the same thing over and over and over every time. I've already been to this training. Is this any different than the last time you did it? And then you want to look at your agility and creativity. What's common for any training? And can I use a template? And remember, as we do things and we make these changes, that familiar feels good. And so that helps with establishing and maintaining trust. So there's things to think about there when you're making changes. Do I want to make it too drastic? Thanks. This is a short thing. If you want to know more about any of these things, let me know. I love talking shop. And if you've got questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. Thanks.